Hi, this is Reverend Dr. Nadine Rosechild-Sullivan, and I'm coming to you tonight. This is Sunday, April 18th, 2021, and I'm coming to you tonight as someone whose heart is lightened in many ways, who is looking forward to the approach of summer, to the end of the school term, as someone who teaches college. You know, there's this kind of last few weeks of teaching, and there's a lot right now, a lot of prep, there's a lot of grading, there'll be a lot of to do toward final grades. It's just a lot of pressure, but there's also light at the end of the tunnel. And that's also sort of where we're at with so many other things right now in our society, in our culture, in our individual lives. There's light at the end of our tunnel. I've been vaccinated, fully vaccinated, 2 doses of the Moderna vaccine, last second dose in the middle of March, fully vaccinated here at nearing the end of April. Many, it's just dropped down to people over 16 years old, no need for health issues, like anybody over 16 in the United States and in our region, being able to get it, being able to get vaccinated, being able to access vaccine. For it to really shift for me, there's a couple of other things that have to happen still. As you know, they have to shift it down to those over age 12. And then for some of you with younger children or younger grandchildren, even the need to, to shift it down to being able to vaccinate those under the age of 12. And so we're not there yet, right? And so the title of tonight's video is going to be, We're Not Out of the Woods Yet. And we're not out of the woods yet with this COVID thing, right? Even though we can see the light at the end of the tunnel, even though, many of us have managed to get 1 or more doses of a vaccine and we're moving forward and there is that sort of shift, there's also some other things going on that mean we're not there yet. So the other thing that is happening, being here in Philadelphia, here in the northeastern part of the United States, it's also clear from the news that, where I'm at, Philadelphia, South Jersey, New Jersey, the rest of the state of New Jersey, New York, that the B1 B.11, whatever the UK variant has taken over the region, has predominated within pretty much the last month. We've shifted from facing that original COVID variant, which was here, which was probably, I don't know, they've talked about the wild type virus and maybe it came from Italy to New York to here initially 13 months ago. But even though, we're at this space and we're getting vaccinated, and the vaccine we've gotten, those of us who've been fortunate enough to access it and who are willing to access it, even though it is, they believe it is good against the original wild type or whatever the original strain was called, and they believe it will be good against the UK variant. It looks hopeful that it will be good against the variant coming that's also in the United States from Brazil. And though it's certainly, things are not going well in Brazil at all. And our hearts go out to all the nations of the world and all the peoples of those nations that are really, really struggling. And we have been at the top of that for much of this time. And it's amazing that our vaccination program is shifting that. But, we don't know if it'll be totally good against other variants that are coming up. We don't know how well it will hold against the South African variant, for instance. And so, there's still a need to be wise. If I go to a store, I still wear a mask. One, because the other shopper doesn't know I've been vaccinated. And so why freak the other shopper out? And 2, there's new variants and there will be more variants, and why be caught with our guard down? So there's those spaces. On the other hand, last week, as I said, in last week's video, I got to eat with my family and without masks on, which we did not do at Christmas and Thanksgiving. I sat a good 30 feet I thought it sat as far away as the space would allow. We had windows open. We all had masks on until it was time to eat our food. And then I was really distanced. And, so it was just nice to be able to feel that much more safe and to feel better and be able to really just relax and let my guard down some with my immediate family. But again, until my grandsons are vaccinated, I can't really be just like I used to be with them in, full measure. And so we're not out of the woods yet. In fact, at this moment, as we sit here tonight, the globe has hit 1 million. Let me read these numbers. These big numbers trip you up. 1,041,861,840 diagnosed cases with around the world, the globe has passed the 3 million death mark, 3,029,583 human beings that have left the earth through this. These are diagnosed people who are diagnosed with COVID and people who've been diagnosed as having died from COVID. And within the United States, our cases, our diagnosed cases, those who had a test, were able to be tested and tested positive, has crossed the 32,381,000 mark, and our deaths at 580,905. And this is using the COVID tracker ncov 2019.live, so ncov 2019.live. Not out of the woods. The other thing that's happening tonight is, I'm going to put on my sociologist hat for a minute. We're sitting here because I'm not a virologist, I'm quoting the news there, but we're sitting here, and I am a sociologist. We're sitting here in this moment when tomorrow, Monday the 19th, closing arguments are due to start in the trial of Derek Chauvin for the lynching murder of George Floyd. Whenever someone is killed extrajudicially, when they are killed, in this case, thought to have committed the crime of passing a counterfeit bill, which any of us may have done any number of times in our life and had no way of knowing it, not accused of being a counterfeiter, but simply accused of the one bill he passed not having been okay, and then, already handcuffed, put in the back of a police car, dragged out of that car, still handcuffed, thrown down, face down on the pavement, and knelt on by 3 officers, one of whom knelt on his neck, and all of it for 9 minutes and some seconds. That is an extrajudicial killing. The job of officers is to arrest, transport, charge, book with whatever, and then allow a system that includes judges and trials and juries and lawyers, allow a system to decide the guilt or the innocence of the individual so charged. When you function in the role of executing, that's not what's going on. Michael Brown, for all of whatever happened in the murder of Michael Brown, he was shot in the back, right? You just, there's been I grew up with the understanding, maybe from old Westerns on television, but you grew up with the understanding that if you shot someone in the back, it was an act of cowardice because they could not have been coming at you because their back was turned toward you. Right? That if they're charging you, you're not going to be shooting the back, you're going to be shooting in the front. So, we watched also the murder of Eric Garner for selling loose cigarettes on a street corner in New York. And there's just been so many. Philando Castile, we watched his murder as he tried to tell an officer, I'm not pulling my gun out, but I'm telling you, I do have one, trying to simply let the officer know, and it was legal, there for him to have one, but, it didn't just the instant, right? And in this time of the trial of Derek Chauvin, this very time, the murder of Adam Toledo in Chicago, a 13-year-old in Chicago who's clearly in the video footage, his hands are empty and his hands are up, right? Who is shot. And, bringing back the murder of Tamir Rice, who was a 12-year-old, and the video footage of the murder of Tamir Rice, the police car hasn't even come to a halt before he has dropped to the ground. The police officer is firing out of the door or the window or whatever's on his side of the vehicle, but the car is still rolling, and they pull up on this child and he's down, right? The murder, in this space of Dante Wright, 20 years old, who stopped, for having an air freshener hanging from his rearview mirror. Like, which one of us don't have? Who of us hasn't had at some point an air freshener hanging from our mirror, and then just, there was a warrant for his arrest. And, in the case of Dante Wright, it does look like he was getting back in his car and trying not to be arrested at that moment. But still, we're told over and over, and this was part of the murder of Oscar Grant in Fruitvale Station. And I think that was New Year's Eve or Day, 2009. But, and he was being knelt on. He was handcuffed. He was down on the pavement in this subway station, and there's a police officer kneeling on his spine. And he, from the footage, there was cell phone footage of his murder taken from all sorts of angles, because there were people from the subway train and on the platform who just pulled out their phones and began filming. And there's a police officer on his back who then stands up and pulls out his gun and shoots him directly at point blank range in the back, killing him, he begins to bleed out. He's transported to the hospital and he dies in surgery at the hospital. But, in that officer also said he didn't know the difference between his gun and his taser. And part of the whole piece of that is, you hear they're different shapes, they're different weights. They're clearly, the taser's brightly yellow colored. They're supposed to be worn on your, the taser's supposed to be worn on your non-dominant hip or whatever that story is. And so you're not supposed to be able, there are these fail safes put into place where you're not supposed to be able to misidentify them or mistake them. And, where there's locks that are supposed to be on them. And just, that pulling a gun out and yelling taser, taser, taser doesn't mean the officer really thought it was a taser, or should have been able to confuse them after 20 some years on the force. And so just that, all of this, and we sit here in this America. We sit here where there's this history, right? We sit here where it's not just the history of the last 3/4 of a year or better. It's not just the history of what happened when George Floyd was shot, and people around the globe began to protest all over the world. Hundreds of thousands of people, Australia, England, all over Europe, all over the globe, hundreds of thousands of people poured out to demonstrate and to protest what they witnessed as Derek Chauvin stayed on George Floyd's neck, steely-eyed, for all those long, long minutes, on a man who was already handcuffed and being knelt on by 2 other officers as well. Part of the not being able to, how do you breathe with 3 full-grown men on your back, compressing your chest, and one of them compressing the arteries and vein of your neck, and whatever it was doing to the actual breathing apparatus of the neck. And yet we sit here in America where it's really not clear what that verdict is going to be. And we sit here in America with a history of lynching. We sit here with a history of about 150 lynchings a year, pretty much from the end of Reconstruction, the end of the Civil War, a couple of years, Northern Army occupying the South, making sure they didn't do wrong to the African-American population that had been liberated by this war. And then the Northern troops are pulled out to go finish off the Indians out west and turn into the cavalry that go and do the massacres at Pine Creek and Wounded Knee and whatever. And in that space, this instantaneous lockdown of Jim Crow laws all over the South, of anti-voting regulations and everything to keep Black and white life separate, with the exception of servitude, and this space that just goes in, and the Klan rises to the top, and the Klan in all their hooded whatevers, and burning crosses on lawns, but also lynching. One of the things that happened in the other pandemic in 1918 and 19, we talk about the Red Summer of 1919, because mobs of unmasked white men during the middle of a pandemic, and they did know to wear masks, and they were wearing masks. It was the primary social distancing, and wearing a mask was your primary means of trying to stop deaths then. And our primary means now. That pandemic killed between 600,000 and 900,000 Americans, and 50 to 100 million around the world. This pandemic, we just hit 580,000. So we're right there at 580,905. So we're right at 581,000. So we're really at the 600,000 mark. So we've got these kind of co-equal pandemics, even though they're slightly different viruses. We've got this, and they had been killing different populations, right? That one in 1918 appeared to kill all ages kind of equally. It would wipe out an entire family. This one appeared to mostly go for the older, sicker people first, but now the new variants, Now, I'm being told by nurses I know that the COVID wards in Philadelphia and this region are full again, and that they're full with younger people, partly maybe because about 3/4 of the older people have been vaccinated. And, so partly it can't come get us, but it's still getting them, and it's still making younger people sick enough that they're going into the hospital, some of them into ICU, some of them on ventilators, some of them in their 20s. Average age in their 50s, but some of the younger, some of the 30s and 40s, and some of the 20-year-olds. This is serious stuff. So serious, these incredibly serious multi-year pandemics. And in the midst of that, both times, people who refused to wear a mask and who then took that and turned it into an opportunity for racial violence, so that you have communities attacked, and you have multiple people in one place lynched, and you have mobs chasing down randoms to commit lynching, to commit murder. So this vigilante violence then and now, only now through, we have cell phone footage and through our police forces, and we get to see over and over and over again, as one commentator pointed out, it's like almost every day. Almost daily, you turn on the news and there's somebody else who was doing something like going to the store, going to go get, just going to get his Skittles and his Arizona iced tea, or going to the, Dante Wright was going to the car wash. He and his girlfriend, the mother of his 6-month-old child, a 20-year-old with a 6-month-old baby that he wanted to raise. And his girlfriend says he was a good father, right? And who has parents who love him. And they have a family support system that, going to raise a daddy in a baby's life. And he's pulled over for having an air freshener hanging from his rearview mirror. Like, you hang it, you hook it over the mirror and it freshens the car. Pulled over for that while on his way to the car wash, and then shot to death in front of her, right? What Philando Castile, his girlfriend going, I can't, you just killed my boyfriend. And the child, her child, I don't know if it was his or not, but her child in the back seat, and then she's arrested, handcuffed, after they just killed her boyfriend in front of her. And she and her child, so I don't know, I think the little girl was about 6, put in the back of the police car, mommy in handcuffs, and the baby crying, mommy, please come down. I don't want the police to shoot you, just like this ongoing something of racial division. And in the midst of it all, people like Jim Jordan and Marjorie Taylor Greene getting up and starting to talk about, Anglo-Saxon political values and saving America from the immigrant takeover and from replacement, saving the white Christian society. There are 2 long-term visions of the United States. Truth is, in anybody's vision, the truth is, it was grounded in the genocide of the indigenous population who lived here. Millions of indigenous people from over 500 nations who lived here. And in that space, it was also built on the backs of unpaid labor of those indigenous people who were also enslaved whenever they didn't die from the smallpox the white people were carrying, or at the sword and the gun of the white people. But there's a history of Indian enslavement as well, right? And also of Mexican enslavement. There's also a history of the enslavement of Chinese laborers being shanghaied and brought over and held in bondage. But there's this overwhelming history of the transport of millions of Africans across the Middle Passage, and the millions that die, in those ships and are tossed overboard, or who die trying to get away, or and then the hundreds of years of race-based slavery. Yes, there was slavery in Greece or Rome, and I'm not I wouldn't have wanted to be a slave there either. I wouldn't want to be a slave anywhere for any purpose, but this particular kind of race-based slavery that is endemic to the United States. And into this mix, right, then comes this racial terror to keep the liberated, the freed African Americans those who had been enslaved and who are set free, to keep them down, and then to keep them down generation by generation by generation, with this egregious policing, which comes out of a war on drugs, which has been a war on Black neighborhoods, and all of this playing out still here. So there's these two stories. There's this truth of enslavement and truth of genocide, and the whole contextualization of that. And then there's this construct of these documents that found this nation state that's got these ideals of liberty and justice. And from those ideals of liberty and justice in this nation state, you have people groups. There's a whole history of social movements in the United States of people groups who were disenfranchised in those documents, doing their best to press in. So we have abolition, and we have the integration of this and that, and we have women's rights movements, and we have gay rights movements, and we have all these disenfranchised people, right? We have an American Indian movement, and we just have all of these movements. We have a labor movement, and all of the people who are going, wait, God endowed me, the Creator endowed me with the right to life, with inalienable rights, and the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I am created equal, and I deserve the vote, and I deserve this, and I deserve that. And so there's this history, and we're all immigrants in that narrative, with the exception of those who are pretty much 100% indigenous, right? If I were half indigenous and half European, then half of me would still have immigrant roots, but also half of me would have native roots. But in this space, there's this narrative. So this narrative for me is all immigrant, right? It's my father's people who've come from Ireland, probably during the famine. We don't know, because you lose that stuff in history, but they're likely from the potato famine, and the Scottish people, and on his mother's side, and then you go over to the other space of my mother, and she's got parents who were born elsewhere. Each of her parents were directly immigrant, and my mother was the first of their children born here in the United States. And then this whole contextualization of me, the descendants of these groups of European, of Austrian, Hungarian, and British Isles, all mixed up, British Isles immigrant. And that's the America I've grown up on, and that America with its social movements, and that America demanding liberty and justice for all, that America which repented of its sins and was, as was forced by good social movement activism to do things like pass the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, and include women in that, and include women in this, and include, and reach out to different groups of people of color, and make this America, right? And it's the one I thought we had. It's the one I thought we got through the 60s and the 70s. It's the one, we knew there was stuff going on with the rich getting richer and the middle class being made to shrink, and, this, that, and the other thing. But over here, there's this other tale still going on. And it's a tale in which there was no genocide, there were no indigenous people. In a tale that Jim Johnson or Matt Gaetz or Marjorie Taylor Greene, or any of that space, and Mitch McConnell, in the tale they're telling of American history, there's it's an empty continent that God gave to the brave, and they founded a white Christian nation. And it's founded in white Anglo-Saxon Protestant values, and it's not meant to be inclusive of Jews or Catholics or Muslims or Hindus or Buddhists or Sikhs or Jains or Wiccans, and it's not meant to be it's not meant to be any of that, and it's not meant to include all of these minority groups. And women have a place, and it's barefoot and pregnant in the kitchen, and we need to take even birth control away from women. We need to make sure they don't have access to choice in the first weeks of a pregnancy, and all of that. And in that mindset, they're still fighting the Civil War. They're still saying, no, this was the America. No, this is what we lost, and this is what we want back, and this is why we have our monuments. This is why you better not take down that monument to, Lee. This is why, we get to carry the Confederate flag through the Capitol building. This is our Capitol, and here's our flag. We're not out of the woods yet. All of that is a fascist movement. Fascism all comes under, it's not about democracy. It's not about all of us having rights to vote and picking representatives who then, hopefully, whom we can try to influence to vote on our side of issues. It's not about any of that. That America in their minds is an America in which the strong man rises to power and he controls. That's the vision of Hitler. It's the vision of Mussolini. It's Bolsonaro in Brazil right now, denying that the epidemic is anything, the pandemic is anything, as his people are dying there. They're unearthing previously buried bodies that died before the pandemic because they're not infectious. They're taking out grandma who was buried 5 years ago, and they're burying 3 new bodies in grandma's space, and they're just like tossing her to the side, and they're putting the new grandma that died in there because they have to cover them. They're digging mass graves, right? Their hospital systems are shut down. And in the midst of that, there's someone telling them, stop whining. Just like man up, basically, right? Like we're strong people and we can say, and you don't need the vaccine, and and he's going out unmasked in public, and he probably got vaccinated and isn't telling them, but you don't want that America. We don't want that America. We don't want an America that goes back and undoes the Civil Rights Act. We don't want an America that has laws in all these states that take away the vote from people of color. We don't want an America that takes away the right of the parents of a transgender child, or the doctors and the social workers and the psychologists to not give treatment, to lose their medical license if they withhold puberty while the child has time to grow up and continue to be sure about who they are, or if they provide counseling for someone who's wondering if they're, about their gender conformity. Like, there are laws being passed in all of these states by one party and not the other. And all of them are anti-civil rights, anti-human rights, your right to your own autonomy, your own bodily self-determination, your own right to choose representatives, your own right to be a living, breathing part of democracy. It's really what we're looking at, democracy versus fascism. And we're not out of the woods yet. While there are some people arrested and being tried for what happened at our Capitol building on January 6, 2021, the people who pulled back the police, the people who didn't to put out the National Guard, the people who didn't want to arm the National Guard when the call came through, the men at the top of those decisions, not on trial yet. And so let us take just a moment to agree together, whatever your religious background. It's a nice principle. Jesus said, if 2 of you will agree on earth as touching anything, it will be done for them of my Father in heaven. And for just a moment, let us agree together that the democracy we thought we've been living in these past few decades is restored, is strengthened, is solidified, is undergirded with all of our voting rights and all of our rights to choose our own medical care with our own best choices with our families and our medical providers and whatever that picture is for all of us. And that the real values that are undergirded are the values of human civil rights. For just a moment, I picture with you, I agree with you for you and yours to make it all the way through this pandemic, safe and whole and well. I agree with you and you with me that we continue to be wise, even though we're fatigued and we're tired of this, that we continue to do what is wise, what is best, to wear a mask, to wash our hands, to physically distance as much as possible, but to get ourselves vaccinated so we can go back to hugging our children and grandchildren, to be in the right space, to do what the science says. And I see you and yours and me and mine coming all the way through this thing. And we also see our nation bathed in the light of the inalienable human rights of each and every human being within its borders, both those who were born here and their legacy, and those who are coming here fleeing persecution, seeking asylum, refugeeing, and that the money goes into properly processing those claims, and that the fear of the immigrant can no longer be used against us. as we recognize every one of us, or almost every one of us, how much the America that we're part of is that nation that was founded with a state that cannot impose or forbid religion, that gives each of us the right to speak our mind, and that gives each of us the right to vote. And I believe I receive that racism goes back under that rock, and that police officers hold themselves and are held to the standard of reasonable protection, where when someone is restrained, when their hands are showing, all of that, that unarmed people, particularly unarmed people of color, particularly unarmed men of color, that these murders, these lynchings stop again. That the way activists like Ida B. Wells caused America to stop its decades-long history of lynching before, that this be again turned back, and that we finally actually learn how much there is to love in each other. Until next week, you be safe and well, and we agree together, walk in the light, and the light is a light that loves all of us. And in America, the light of freedom of that torch loves us all.